Bon dia, good morning, Majinwai, Borada. It's really such a delight to have everyone with us so early in the morning. I'm going to hand over to our first keynote speaker for Catalan, Dr. Cariad Astles, who we're really happy to have with us. Cariad is the course leader for puppetry, design and performance within the theatre practice programme at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. She worked for several years as a puppeteer with Travessura Theatre, which is was run by Chilean exiles in London, as well as Little Angel Theatre and a host of other companies. She also works with the Catalan-based collective Irenia, a group of artists and educators working on the themes of peace, development and global education. Within this group, she has been running different training workshops for peace education and development in Tunisia and Catalunya, and the group has been nominated for various awards by international bodies. Alongside a host of research grants from UK and international bodies, Cariad is also a UK councillor for the International Puppetry Association, UNIMA, and a member of the Research Commission and the Commission for Cooperation. And with that, we will hand over. We're so delighted to have Cariad with us. So thank you, Cariad. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that lovely introduction. I should just add to that alongside my work at the Central School of Speech and Drama, I'm also an academic within the drama department in Exeter University. I would like to thank all of the organisers of this conference and say it's an honour to be presenting on youth theatre in Catalunya. I've been involved in researching and participating in theatre contexts in Catalunya for something like 20 to 25 years now. And in a way, I came into this field rather by accident and discovery, as I guess many of us do through our journeys through theatre, academia, and so on. But the topics of this conference today are so vast and so important for everybody in constructing, elaborating, and ultimately, hopefully, shifting perspectives on who we are and how we want to live. Language, youth, and performance are three great narratives. Language, because amongst many other things, it's a way of making meaning of existence. Youth, because these are the people who will and do make the meaning of both today and tomorrow. And performance, because through performance, we enact our belief systems, our aspirations, and our identities. So I was thinking about the ways in which we use language and terminology to reflect shifting political ideologies. And my talk is going to be largely a series of reflections, different reflections on different aspects of performance in Catalunya and the myths of those performances, because when we perform, we articulate myth, and it is the myth of identity that we seek to interrogate through performance, and particularly perhaps when working in the context of young children and young people. So I was thinking about the terms through which we're talking about Catalan, Welsh and Irish and other languages, and I was thinking about the term minority languages and minoritized languages, which possibly suggest something smaller, possibly suggest something less, but especially suggest something quite vulnerable. And we know if we're working in these contexts that these languages are vulnerable, and part of the process of what we're doing is to protect those languages and to celebrate their diversity and their importance in communicating those very same belief systems, aspirations and identities. And some forms of utilitarianism, would have us believe that dominance by the majority is in some way preferable. And so I wondered if it might be interesting to think about the ways in which we define minority and minoritized languages and regional languages in the same way that we've shifted definitions of different countries from things like developing countries, global south, to majority world, and racial categorizations of Black and ethnic minority BAME and other terms have shifted to people of color. So I think it's an interesting discussion about how we categorize and how we discuss these languages, and these languages of performance, because all languages are of performance in the way in which they express the myths that we perform through. But first, I would like to go to an anecdote, and I would also like to give my, not exactly apologies, but my acknowledgement that this talk is being given in a language of colonialism and a language of dominance. I think it's important to mention that in a conference of this nature. I discussed with Richard which language I should deliver it in, and I could deliver it in Catalan, but sadly I could not deliver it. Despite my name, I could not deliver it in either Welsh or Irish. So the title of my presentation today is "We Are All Beasts and Bigheads, Youth and Popular Performance in Catalunya." Now, I'm not sure which of you who are listening today are familiar with aspects of Catalan popular performance, aspects of Catalan popular culture. But just to give you some context, in case you are not, beasts and bigheads are performative, popular effigies and puppets that are processed, danced and performed in traditional popular festivals around the whole of Catalunya. And the animals are called the bestiari, they are called the beasts, and bigheads, which you can't actually see in this slide, but you will see later, are giant heads that are placed upon performers' heads to take part in dances and celebrations of particular places and particular days. Virtually every place in Catalunya has its own feast day or popular festival. These happen throughout the year, although many of them take place in the sort of spring and summer months, and the presence of young people in these festivals is very important, and I will be commenting on that a little bit later on. Now, I'm moving to an anecdote now, which was told to me by a good friend of mine who I lived with for some time in Catalunya. She's a fairly non-politicized person. She's a close friend, and I visited her shortly after the referendum, which took place in 2017. And she narrated to me some of the events of that referendum, or some of the effects of the referendum that was held by the then Catalan government as they happened in her small town in the pre-Pyrenees. For those of you who do not know, the Catalan government in 2017 attempted to hold talks with the Spanish government in Madrid over the question of independence and requested permission to hold a referendum. This permission was denied, and after many attempts at dialogue, the Catalan devolved government went on and held a referendum on the 1st of October that year. My friend, whose name is Mhárta, told me that the urnas, or the ballot boxes, had been set up the previous day in the local primary school. The voting officers had been in the school since the previous night and had slept there to protect the boxes. Since the Spanish government had not given permission for the referendum, it was deemed illegal, and police officers were positioned at the doorway to the school to prevent people from voting. Seeing that the entry to the school was barred, after some hours and quite a bit of discussion at the doorway to the school, people continued arriving en masse, detaining the police in lengthy discussions and protests. As the crowds at the door grew, the voting officers inside the school discreetly removed the boxes from the back door of the school and took them undercover to the sacristy of the church, where the priest was holding a mass. Disgruntled people, after attempting to argue with the police at the door, gave up and attended church instead. One by one, they filed in, and after a prayer, slipped into the back room to cast their vote. They then returned to the door of the school to protest further, keeping the police officers ignorant and fully engaged at the door whilst the voting was taking place elsewhere. Now, I was hugely struck by this story, which sounded to me like some kind of one of, for example, Eduardo Galeano's magical realist journalistic records, or a short story by Garcia Marquez. Political reality became a magical realist universe, linking individuals with a myth to be told again and again across generations. Young people who had hitherto not necessarily been very political viewed the story with eager eyes and contemplated their own place within this narrative, the holding of a secret of something they shared amongst themselves. No less than this, and not particularly in this particular town, they watched television reporting on the referendum and saw the bloodied heads and beaten bodies of voters, which I will just jump onto, as you see here. Mhárta, my friend, told me simply that the young people had not previously seen violence in the streets of Catalunya, and seeing batons and chains turned against people for voting shifted their conscience powerfully. And I'm just going to show you a short clip from that referendum. Okay, so I should probably have done a trigger warning before that video, so I apologize for not doing that. And for those of you who haven't seen that, or for those of you who are not familiar with it, it was a very powerful and influential event that happened on that day. So the purpose of this anecdote and the affects of the anecdote and the affects of the experience is in fact to highlight the importance of the creation of myth in the development of identity and agency. So in my talk, I'm going to be discussing what kind of myths have been created and are created by the involvement of children and young people in Catalan performance contexts. I will go back to the PowerPoint now, and I'm going to talk very, very briefly about some of the history of Catalunya and the Catalan language. I won't talk through this slide, you can read it, but there has been a contested relationship between Catalunya and Spain and with the Catalan language for centuries. As you can see, there have been different times in the past when Catalan itself has been repressed. The independence of Catalunya has also been a contested process, which has been continuing again for centuries. But in fact, as I'm sure many of you will know, the defining feature of the 20th century, which affected the development and understanding of Catalunya, as a nation, and Catalan language as a language under threat, was the Spanish Civil War and the subsequent dictatorship under Franco, when Catalan as a language was respectively banned, denied, repressed, censored, and so on. With the movement from the dictatorship to democracy, which happened in the late 70s and early 80s, Catalunya was recognized as a nation within the Spanish state, and Catalan as a language was recognized. But it had contested status over throughout that time since then. And there are now protests taking place, not right now, but ongoing protests and disputes taking place about, for example, the use of Catalan in schooling. Many people don't think that Catalan should be obligatory in schooling in Catalunya, but it is the policy that education is delivered in Catalan state schools, primary and secondary schools. I've been working in Catalunya for something like 15 to 20 years, running theatre workshops in schools and running workshops with teachers and trainers and youth workers. And I find myself in the peculiar position, I often find myself in the peculiar position of having to teach Catalan to children in schools who are objecting to the use of it. So and that process has increased, in fact, over the last 20 years that I've been working there. I've noticed that more people are complaining about the use of Catalan in schools. So it's very much a language under threat. It's very much something that's contested, even though it and continues to be the language of education and the language of much cultural activity, which we will be seeing shortly. There was recently, I'm just going to show you another short clip now. There was recently another event that took place just a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, in which a nurse in a hospital who was applying, wanted to apply for a permanent position in hospitals in Catalunya as a nurse, as a health worker, complained very vociferously using lots of cursing about the fact that the exams to become to have this permanent contract had to be in Catalan, and how stupid and ridiculous and shitty she thought it was. So I'll just show a short clip of that, which is actually in Spanish. So sorry if you don't understand Spanish, but the content is what I have described to you.
Y nada, y resulta que vienen aquí a contarnos pues sobre ¿cómo se llama esta mierda?
Esto es un sindicato.
Pero no para sacarnos ¿qué? ¿Cómo se llama la plaza?
La oposición.
Las oposiciones, ay que se me pone bloqueado. Las oposiciones aquí en Cataluña y nosotras, bueno, venga, vale, cuéntame, ok. Nos dicen, sacan 3.500 plazas de enfermera, no sé qué, este es vuestro año, vais a sacarlo seguro, tal.
Hasta que nos dice.
Y nos dice lo siguiente, tenemos que tener para sacarnos las putas oposiciones que el puto C1 de catalán.
¿C1? ¿Quién se ha apuntado?
El C1 de catalán. ¿Te has apuntado?
Yo voy a hacer las oposiciones.
Clara, por favor, me estás desmontando el vídeo, tía.
Okay, so even if you couldn't understand the Spanish that was spoken, you would be able to see the body language when she is saying you have to speak effing Catalan in this. So on to talking about youth popular performance and language. So what I would like to suggest as a way of thinking about the engagement of young people in making, watching and participating in performance is this idea of myth. We know that myth is crucial and key to individual and group identity. And to cite the wonderful theatre scholar John McGrath, through performance, we interrogate the myth of our community. So I posit that performance by and for youth in Catalan, in Catalunya, over the last 50 years or so, offers us the chance to examine the myths that have been built, the myths that are proposed, and to offer a critical awareness of identity in the construction of myths. Through my use of the term myth, I'm not referring to anything that's not true or anything that's invented or illusory. Instead, I'm proposing that in performing and in using language within performance, we are creating vision, belonging, and giving ourselves the possibility to critically interrogate identity. If, therefore, using globalized and dominant hegemonic languages in performance, we enact dominant narratives in using minoritized languages, which I am going to call, for the purposes of this talk today, nodals. A nodal being a non-dominant language. Perhaps in this context, we can enact the complexity of marginal, intersectional, and contestational spaces and identities. This in turn gives rise to the potential for what Gómez Peña has referred to, this lovely quote, the juicy interstices of overlapping identity formation. It is clear that identity and language are linked to ideas of nationhood. I don't propose to examine in detail questions of nationhood in this talk, but I would just say that, in my opinion, all forms of nationalism, which I treat with caution, are not the same as all forms of nationhood, which refers more concretely to the sense of belonging and the wish for self-determination. Lance and Zweigart Gaeilge note the presence of youth in constructs of nationalism and nationhood and its crucial influence. Nationhood is both a symbolic and mythological construct, and a unifying factor in engaging the collective consciousness of a people is performance through ritual, popular performance, communal customs and traditions, as well as traditional theatre performance. The position of youth in Catalunya within these popular performances is crucial, since through young people, a society is transformed and transmitted. Lance and Zweigart Gaeilge further note that the presence of youth within narratives of nationhood can be coercive or contestational. And we see throughout the history of theatre, popular performance is positioned on all kinds of sides of political identity. Morden further suggests that narrative influences the acquisition and interpretation of information and how stories are used to construct or reinforce a collective understanding of events. So in the moments or periods that I'm going to talk about in relation to youth performance and the involvement of young people in theatre in Catalunya, I'd like to refer to what Bell describes as a mythscape, the temporally and spatially extended discursive realm in which myths of nationhood are forged, transmitted, negotiated, and reconstructed constantly. Through employing the idea of a mythscape, we can relate memory and mythology to each other. So the two periods that I would like to talk about in relation to youth and identity are the period that lasts from the late 1960s until the early 1990s, and from the year, approximately the year 2000 until today. The first period is what I would call the golden age of Catalan artistic resurgence. And in referring to it as a golden age, I want to note that when people are attempting to construct a theatre of nation, they often look back with some romanticism to what they might perceive as a golden age. And they look back to traditional performance, popular performance, and so on. We need to remember that this golden age, in inverted commas, came out of a period of repression of Catalan, the civil war and the dictatorship. You can see in the images on the slide here, images from the dictatorship. We see in the image on the right of the slide the link with Nazism, the link with the church, the link with dictatorship, and the contestation that on the left that is opposing this. And here we see more images from the civil war and the fights for the recognition of Catalan and Basque identity. More images from the dictatorship. So as the dictatorship came to a close, it came to an end in its last years, and there was a softening towards representations of Catalan identity, there was what I would call an explosion of popular performance culture, largely on the streets of Barcelona and other towns and places in Catalunya, which drew on spectacular traditional forms in the through puppetry, street theatre, popular music, masks, stilts, giant puppets drawn from the popular tradition, and giant heads also drawn from the popular tradition. Young people were at the forefront of this movement. Young people were often people who were graduating from the Institut del Teatre in Barcelona, sought ways of challenging what had previously been the status quo and of bringing new forms into existence in theatre. And this is what we see in this period of time when popular forms were developed in order to bring the question of Catalan identity and the question of Catalan nationhood into being. Now, I'd like to show you a couple of videos which are important references for this period in Catalan history. The first of these is from the now globally well-known company Els Comedians, who drew their influences very much from popular tradition at this time. Now, it's important to note that when this performance, Demonis, devils, demons, was first conceived and performed, it was performed largely by young performers, two groups of people that included what we might refer to in the UK as family audiences, so included young people in the celebration of these kind of performances. If I now show you a clip of perhaps the most famous giant puppets and big head performance in Catalunya, Lapatum, it's almost identical to Demonis, performed by Els Comedians. So you can see very clearly the link between this. And in the video I'm going to show you now, you can also see the strong presence of young people as essential participants and performers within this kind of popular performance.
When giants dance on the town square and dragons breathe fire. It's time for Lapatum in Berga, Catalunya. What have I got myself into? And when the lights go out, the crowd goes crazy and the demons emerge. Berga is a town of around 16,000 residents at the foot of the Pyrenees. Every year around Corpus Christi, the town pulls out all the stops for Lapatum, a 5-day festival celebrated with mystical and symbolic figures, much as it has been since the Middle Ages. I'm not only here for handshaking with those giants, I'm here to try out everything in the Patum de Berga, even to get under his skirt, if it's possible, and to carry him a bit. But before we think big, we start with smaller things. Soon on the St. Pierre town square, several thousand people will be standing close together in the midday heat. They'll be celebrating the first of 2 Patums today, where figures dance around in the midst of the crowd. A group of smaller figures is also on hand. I'd like to join in, so I meet Oscar Guijarro, who's been donning one of the 8 costumes for 25 years now. How old is this hat?
How old? It's from 1853, so it's 176 years old.
Okay, that's just to give you a little bit of a taste of the festival, so that you can both see how involved young people are in performing and attending Lapatum, but also so that you can see the very close similarity between this Catalan popular festival and the performance of Demonis that was created by Els Comedians in the 80s. I would say Comedians was perhaps one of the most important groups to be performing in what I'm referring to as the golden age of Catalan performance in the 20th century. But I'm going to refer also to another one, which was developed and performed by the company La Claca. This was important because it had a very particular political contestation. It was a giant puppet show, also drawing inspiration from the Bigheads and the giant puppets, and it was created in collaboration with the painter, the Catalan painter, Joan Miró, so using his aesthetic for the creation of these giant puppets. And in this performance, which was first performed in 78, so just very shortly after the dictatorship after Franco had died, and there was a period of transition. It represents the dictator, or a figure of authority, as something ridiculous and stupid and incomprehensible and absurd. And initially the performance created a lot of dialectic, and there were talks about it being banned and so on. As some of you will know, there are a number of stories of politically engaged artists being imprisoned for their critique of aspects of the dictatorship. However, this performance then was not eventually it was not banned, and eventually it was performed in many locations also outside Catalunya. There are, I haven't been able to find any videos from its original performances, but the performance was actually resurrected a couple of decades ago. And so the video I'm going to share with you now is from the resurrection of that performance. The show is called Mori el Mema, which means more or less death to the monster. again, that gives you a taste of the kind of performance it is. So these performances are being performed at their first iteration. They're being performed largely by young people, young artists at the beginnings of their career, two groups of people that are composed of many young people, many children. The performances are also appropriate for children to watch them. So what's the myth that's being performed here, to go back to my earlier question? The myth at this time, in this golden age of performance of popular forms in Catalunya, was that of change, that society was changing, and that Catalan was the language of that change, that there was a nation and Catalunya had its own traditions and forms which were important and relevant for identity for young people. Also, that Catalan was outdoors under the dictatorship. Of course, Catalan was not used in formal contexts. It was not permitted to be used in formal contexts. So the fact that many of these performances are happening outdoors was very, very important. And Catalan is everywhere. And moreover, young people, children and young people, were important in this narrative. It was created by the vibrant search for new forms which would stand in stark contrast to the dreary and top-down messages from institutional culture, from the dictatorship. So the myth that is expressed here is both of nationhood, but also of rebellion, of celebration and of contestation. And this was a very important myth to be performed at this time for Catalan culture. So I would like to move on to the second period that I would like to discuss, which is the last 20 years or so. So arising out of this early movement, a number of organizations and institutions and projects which were set up, which were designed to include young people or to be addressed towards young people. And these included, apologies, I'll just run forwards. These included an organization called the Gaeilge, which was set up to develop theatre for young people, children and young people. The Cicles Cavall Fort. Cavall Fort is a magazine aimed at children, and one of the initiatives arising out of this magazine was the setting up of a series of effectively theatre festivals for children and young people, which took place over a number of years. And all these initiatives led to the ultimate, to the setting up of the web, the foundation of a web, a network for theatre for young people, children and young people. Alongside this, a number of festivals were set up, festivals to bring theatre to young people, and some conferences, debates and discussions around what it meant and what it means to create theatre for young people. A new course was set up at the Institut del Teatre in Rubí, directly to train people in educational theatre. That course, however, was discontinued around 15 years ago and hasn't been resurrected, although a number of smaller projects have been resurrected aimed at delivering theatre workshops and theatre environments for people ranging from small children to young adults. And that continues to take place today. There have been the impetus and the direction of theatre for young people, children and young people in recent years has been that of locating children and young people as the protagonists of work, deciding powers over the programming and the development of activities which celebrate theatre for young people, but also taking place in theatre as well themselves, performing in theatre themselves as well. One important festival that has been set up, which is a very recent one, this Festival of Young People's Theatre, the RBLS Festival. And of course, the Festival of Theatre for Young People in the town of Igualada has also been a very important initiative, which brings theatre to young people, but also involves young people again in the programming and the development of those platforms. And I'll show you a little bit of that work now. So the focus has been very much more on educational theatre and on interactive theatre. So if we just, many of you will be familiar with forum theatre, and this video just shows you a little bit of one of the projects that's been taking place through the educational activities through the Department of Youth in Catalunya.
Buscar solucions col·lectives. Fer servir l'art com a eina de transformació social és la raó de ser del Fort de Teatre per Tothom, una escola que utilitza el teatre de l'oprimit per empoderar determinats col·lectius. Els joves del barri en són un.
Quan el noi realment descobreix que aquí no venim per formar-lo en una determinada via, sinó que és un espai perquè ell digui la seva, en aquest moment ell s'allibera molt de la pressió que pot suposar venir a fer un teatre, perquè se n'adonen que és un espai bastant neutre i que ells s'han de crear.
No es tracta tant de formar actors com de donar valor a la paraula dels joves.
Empoderament a dir la teva, ganes de parlar, ganes de poder creure que la teva paraula és vàlida. El canvi que jo he vist principalment, diríem, és a joves que creien que no servia de res parlar, que no servia de res moure's.
I won't show it anymore, partly because I've noticed what time it is already and time is running out, but also because it's in Catalan. So just to sort of offer a couple of, just to translate a couple of moments of that. What the guy is saying in the video is that what's important is for young people is for them to hear that to know that their voice is heard within theatre contexts and within society, and that it's important for them to be able to express their own identity and to express their word in new forms of theatre. So I would say that educational theatre with a strong educational and instructional impulse and interactive theatre have been dominant in young people's theatre over the last 20 years or so. So young people are now perceived as protagonists in the creation of theatre which is for them, but also in giving them the space to narrate and interrogate complexities, journeys, and identities. It is clear that Catalan as a language is still under threat, and attempts to suppress it are increasingly strong. But so the space of theatre is a means to educate, to explore difficult narratives about migration, environment, identity, politics, different extremisms happening all around the world. And the theatre space has become a space in recent years to interrogate those particular forms. With that, I will stop because I know that we have more or less run out of time, and I wanted to give a little bit of time for any questions or comments. So thank you very much and for listening, and I hope that's been informative and interesting for you.